In this episode of Joan Deserves a Musical, I want to talk about Antagonists. But first, a very big milestone. Monday this week, I had a meeting with Amanda, my songwriter, and I actually got to hear a song. It was awesome. It was an early version and lots of feedback back and forth, but lots of big ideas came out of that meeting, and we're now charging forward, and this thing's actually going to be a musical. I couldn't be more excited. This is something I've hoped for like a year and a half now, and now it's really actually happening, and that is amazing. But in this conversation with Amanda, she asked me who is the bad guy in this movie. I mentioned she pointed out to me the musical structure of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, how we kind of set up the theme at the beginning, and then at the end we have kind of a bookend of that. And in the intro to Hunchback of Notre Dame, we're very clearly setting up the villain, right? Here is Frollo, and he's a bad dude. He hates gypsies, and he's the monster, right? And so she was asking me who's the bad guy. And so I speculated about some English leaders and some fun ideas I've had as I've worked on drafts of this. But honestly, the current version of the script doesn't have a clear villain. I think I've mentioned in previous videos, my first draft of this was like 130 pages. I've had to cut it down to 85. And in doing that, the villains are pretty much removed. There are a few interactions with minor English commanders, but mostly it's just the French people we focus on. We don't really have a specific personified villain. But as I was talking with Amanda about this, she said, "Oh, I think the villain is the ambivalence of the French leaders." And for me, it was just like a eureka moment. That's it. Oh my goodness, how did I not see it? And it's funny because a few weeks ago, I watched, my wife and I watched all the Star Wars movies. And as we rewatched the original trilogy, I was just blown away, first of all, by how good it is. I could go on and on about that, but that's not relevant to Joan of Arc, except that my favorite thing about it is that the villain is defeated through redemption. Darth Vader is redeemed in the end, right? He is reclaimed by the light side of the Force just before he dies. As opposed to almost every story I know where the villain is defeated by being defeated, right? Often suffering an ignominious death, especially like classic Disney. Whoa, those villains, they suffer terrible deaths. It's not very often you have a bad guy who is redeemed. Honestly, the only Disney example I can think of is not even a musical. It's Meet the Robinsons, which is a great and severely underrated movie. But the villain who is redeemed is not even the main villain. The main villain is destroyed. So it just doesn't happen very often. I think that's a really tantalizing idea, that you can defeat a villain by redeeming them. But this was just a fun hypothetical exercise in my mind. Wouldn't it be fun to someday write a movie or a book where the villain is defeated through redemption, never realizing that is the Joan of Arc story? So Charles, the heir to the French throne, who Joan is trying to get crowned, he starts out, he's very apathetic. And I have said, I don't know if I've ever said in this series, but the way I think about it is Joan doesn't go through much of a character arc. She has her mission, she pushes. She has ups and downs, she has moments of doubt, but she holds the course and she perseveres, and that is her story. Charles is the one who goes through transformation. At the beginning, he has this indecisive, hand-wringing, not very kingly heir to the French throne, and at the end, Joan is able to convince him to lead the armies and to talk to some dissenters and to start behaving like a king, and then he's able to get crowned. But it never occurred to me that he was the antagonist. It's late, sorry. And so that's very exciting to me. That gives me clarity on how this whole thing is working. How can you have a movie where the main character doesn't have an arc? Well, what's going on is Joan is defeating the antagonist, which is Charles' not apathy, I think ambivalence is the right word. He's hesitant, he doesn't want to make a mistake, he's overly cautious, and she helps him have confidence in his role as king, and that's how she defeats him. I think it's so cool. And one thing I'll mention is there's a YouTube channel called Sideways. I don't know if he's still posting, actually. It's been a while since I checked, but he does really in-depth analyses of music and musicals and movie scores. And he claims, and I'm inclined to believe him, that the best example of a Disney musical structure is actually a Goofy movie, which I love that movie, so I'm okay with accepting this. But as he's laying it out, he points out in that movie, Goofy is the antagonist. Max is the protagonist, and he even has a villain song and things. And he's not in any way menacing. He's not in any way a typical villain, but he stands in the way between Max and his goals. And I suppose there isn't really redemption in that arc, but they do meet in the middle. They both change and they come together. And I just think that's such a delightful idea. I'm really excited to do something similar where, when this movie exists, let's just be confident and say it will exist someday. And we all watch it in the movie theater together. Let's be confident on that point too. I don't think people will come out and be like, whoa, there was a spooky villain, right? I think some people will even say, wow, kind of interesting. It's sort of Pixar-like that there was no villain in that movie, but there will be a villain. If you analyze it carefully, there is a clear antagonist, and Joan will defeat him through redemption. Oh, there's so many things I like about this. Anyway, that's the update, and I'll be back another time with more.